Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
The PowerPoint? Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Alana Dawn. I'm the Sustainability and Partnerships and Events Coordinator here at UCalgary. We're really grateful and excited to host Dr. Larissa Dooley with the Climate Mental Health Network. We're to explore the science of climate emotions and evidence-based tools for building resilience. We'll also learn how to stay grounded, nurture positive emotions, and support others in coping with climate-related stress and uncertainty. So we'd like to start today's session with a land acknowledgement. The University of Calgary is located in the heart of southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, which includes Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. So I share this land acknowledgement today to honor Indigenous communities that have taken care of this land since time immemorial and continue to do so. I'm really grateful to live here. As a settler, I acknowledge my responsibilities as a Treaty 7 person and strive for truth and reconciliation. Indigenous communities are the most impacted by climate change and are also leaders in climate justice and biodiversity protection, and I'm really grateful for their leadership. So today's event is part of You Flourish programming that's running until November 15th. This is a 2-week event that aims to bring mental health and well-being programs to the forefront of our campus community as well as the Calgary community. There are really a lot of wonderful sessions to help de-stress, make new connections, and build positive coping skills, so that we recommend you check them out. There is one keynote coming up that I wanted to share with you. Dr. Shintaro Kono is an associate professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of Alberta, and he's going to be speaking on leisure and mental health and how we can achieve more of that work-life balance that we're all striving for. And lastly, before you get to meet the lovely Larissa, I wanted to let you know that this event is also part of Mobilizing Alberta. This project really strengthens the capacity for advancing climate action in Calgary and across southern Alberta. We've funded and support 20 climate action projects that bring together faculty, students, and community partners to meet a community climate need. We also offer a free e-course really focused on preparing Albertans for climate change. So you can check that out if you go to the QR code, or if you simply Google Preparing Albertans for Climate Change. And then we also host events like this. So now I'm really honored to introduce you all to Dr. Larissa Dooley. Thanks so much for joining us, Larissa. She is a climate psychologist and the director of research and programs at the Climate Mental Health Network. She studies how climate change affects our mental health and well-being and works to turn that research into practical tools for resilience. Through her team's programs and resources, she helps educators and communities find ways to support their emotional well-being and connection in the face of climate challenges. So please join me in welcoming Larissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alana Dunn and the University of Calgary team. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about cultivating emotional resilience in the context of climate change. We are living through challenging times. There's rising wildfires and storms and heat waves, and all of this is happening at the same time of growing social and political divisions and increasing feelings of isolation in our digital world. So how do we live with all this uncertainty and strife? And how do we begin to build strength and perseverance and resilience that we're going to need to face these increasing challenges? How do we live well and find peace and purpose and meaning and still manage to enjoy our lives amidst so much change and upheaval? These are some of kind of the questions that we're going to begin to grapple with in the next 90 minutes. So thank you so much for being here. And first, I want to start by hearing a little bit from you. So I'm going to share Mentimeter. We're going to do this with Mentimeter, which is a little tool, and you can join 2 ways. Okay, can you see it okay? Okay, so 2 ways. You can go to menti.com on a separate browser and enter this code, and it will take you to this little poll. Or you can scan this QR code and it will take you here too. But I just want to ask you to tell me who you are in one word. Maybe it's mother, educator, student, um, dog lover, whatever it is. Just in one word, tell me a little bit about who you are. Student, yeah. Organizer, friend, restorationist, I like that. Activist, wanderer, nature lover, ecologist, daughter, retired nurse, learner, earth doctor. Oh, this is my kind of crowd. All right. Um, oh, I'll see. There's a couple more coming in. Learner. I think I said that one already. Restorationist. Okay. Oh, we had another student. Great. Okay. And then the next question is, and it should advance automatically on your end as well. So today's topic is emotional resilience in a changing climate. What made you interested in this topic today? Why did you register for this webinar? What made you sign up and spend your lunchtime here with me? My mental health. This is what I research. Great. A feeling of helplessness, feeling hopeless, climate crisis, because I care. To make sure we keep talking about this. Because they're always learning, feeling overwhelmed, the overwhelming gloom of the world right now, ways to deal with the climate crisis, learn and advocate. As someone who's a clinical psychology student and who has a huge passion for the outdoors, I wanted to integrate these two fields of knowledge. Oh, great. Learn and engage more, increase feeling and anxiety and hopelessness around the state of the world. Yeah. Looking for tools to support my navigation of current social and ecological issues, helping others to cope. I manage a CO2 removal interdisciplinary project. The earth needs us more than ever. I want to explore climate emotionality and study it more to help women of color, such as myself, who are disproportionately and adversely affected by it. Wow, this is an amazing group. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and kicking us off. I'm going to go to some slides now. So bear with me while I share. Okay. Okay, so I want to start off by giving you some kind of foundational information about climate change and ecological loss can impact mental health and well-being, and then I'll move on to some of the neurobiology of climate stress as well as resilience, and then talk about kind of some strategies and tools we can use to help kind of face all of this adversity with resilience and strengthen our resilience muscles. So first, just kind of the basics of how climate change impacts mental health. Well, climate change has been declared a health emergency by governments and medical associations, but it really wasn't until recently traditionally that focus has been on the impacts of climate change on physical health. And it really wasn't until recently that there's been increasing recognition that climate change also profoundly impacts mental health, contributing to trauma and anxiety and substance abuse and PTSD, and also that these physical and mental health impacts are deeply interconnected and feed into one another. And really, if we want the model to be more complete, we have to include the impacts of climate change on community health. Climate change can lead to displacement and disconnection and loss of community. And these community impacts in turn have implications for both mental and physical health. So all of these kind of three buckets feed into one another and influence one another. But our focus today is on the impacts of climate change on mental health and well-being. So how does climate change impact mental health? What are the pathways by which this can occur? Well, First, I'm sure it's not surprising that living through a climate change related disaster, a wildfire, a flood, a storm, can be traumatic. It can also lead to major losses, the loss of a loved one, a pet, a home, one's place of business, a child's school. And all of this can cause significant stress and mental health issues. Um, like I talked about before, post-traumatic stress and trauma, depression, anxiety. And so we talk about these as the direct impacts of climate change, experienced often by people who have been directly impacted by an extreme weather event. I live in LA. We had some mega fires here in LA earlier this year in January, and we've seen a lot of kind of people who have been directly impacted, who lost their homes, schools, communities, and we've seen a lot of kind of the direct impacts of climate change on mental health through those fires. But it's important to note that a person's mental health can also be indirectly impacted by climate change. So these indirect impacts refer to people who haven't necessarily been directly impacted by a climate disaster yet, but are nevertheless experiencing significant and real psychological pain from knowing that climate change is happening, from watching climate disasters play out on the news or in the media, reading articles about it. I get that, I experience the indirect impacts of climate change every time the new IPCC report comes out. Or just noticing negative changes in one's environment, kind of warmer weather or loss of snowfall in the winter, for example. And all of this can cause real and profound psychological distress. We have terms for this: climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, climate grief. And even though these sound like diagnoses, they're really not. They are, climate anxiety, for example, is not a pathological condition at all. It's just a natural and normal and very justified response to a very real threat. And we often talk about, even though I talked about grief and anxiety, there's really a range of emotions that people can and do experience about climate change. So this is the Climate Emotions Wheel, which was created by the Climate Mental Health Network, where I work. It's based on the research by Panu Pakala, and it shows really common emotions that people have reported feeling about climate change. So there's kind of anger-based emotions like outrage, frustration, betrayal, kind of sadness-oriented emotions like despair, grief, guilt, fear-based emotions, powerlessness, anxiety, overwhelm, and also positive emotions like empowerment, gratitude, hope. And I also want to say that if you're worried about climate change, you are far from alone. So in Canada, 67% of people are concerned or very concerned about climate change. And more than that, 69% say that it's a serious or very serious problem. And I really like to emphasize this because I too often hear people say, oh, well, I'm really worried about climate change, but no one else seems to care. Or so many people deny that climate change isn't happening. Or we have so many climate deniers in this country. Or, I'm in the US, but we hear a lot of that. There's so many climate deniers in this country. And the truth is that the majority of people in Canada and also in the US, these figures are actually very similar to the US numbers, the majority believe in climate change and are worried about it. So why then do we think that most people don't care? Because even though most people are worried, only about 24% regularly talk about it with family or friends. And this is maybe a slightly conservative estimate because this particular figure is based on regularly talking about it once a week. So only 24% of Canadians say they talk about it about once a week. So if we ask people, do they ever talk about it, or do they talk about it kind of once a month or regularly, that goes up to maybe 30-35%. But the point is that a much smaller percentage, less than half of people that are worried about it, are ever talking about it. So that silence around our concerns about climate change feeds a false perception that we're alone in our concern. And psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance, when everyone privately feels the same way, but assumes that they're the only one. And the result of this is that we stay quiet, we hesitate to act, and we reinforce the illusion that others don't care. And we make it a social norm not to care and not to take action. When the reality is that the norm is that people are worried. That's the real norm. The real social norm is that people are worried. Most people are worried, and most people believe it and are concerned. And so if you're worried, you are not an outlier, you are in the majority. Okay, so back to your mentee for a moment. I want to ask the next question, which is, are you concerned about climate change? We've got 7 very concerned, somewhat concerned. So the most people in this group are very concerned or somewhat concerned. We have 0, not very, or not at all concerned. And then the next question is, do you talk about climate change with family and or friends? And there's no right or wrong answers here. Like, just be honest if you talk about it or not. I don't talk about it as much as I should. I talk about it a lot at work and not nearly as much with my family or friends. So I am also guilty of this. Okay, great. We've got some people talking about it. That's good. We've got a lot of people talking about it. And we also have some people who are rarely talking about it, which is, thank you for being honest. I'm probably somewhere between sometimes and rarely with my family and friends. So I'm in there too. Okay, so back to the slides. Let's see. When we look at youth, we consistently see that young people are even more concerned, more worried, and are experiencing more mental health impacts of climate change compared with older generations, older adults. A study of 16 to 25-year-old Canadians found that 78% of youth say climate change impacts their mental health. So that's a huge figure. 56% say that climate change makes them feel afraid, sad, anxious, and powerless. And a full 37% say that their feelings about climate change affect their ability to function. And this last one is really meaningful to me as a psychologist because in clinical psychology, which I'm not a clinical psychologist, but if I were, and what's meaningful to clinical psychologists is that we start to get worried about something when it starts to affect someone's daily functioning. So if someone is experiencing some anxiety, but they say it doesn't interfere with their daily life in any way, it doesn't interfere with their ability to go to work or enjoy their life with their family or, sleep or eat, then we're not really that worried about that anxiety or depression or whatever it is they're experiencing. But the measure, the kind of benchmark of when a symptom becomes or a condition becomes clinically significant is if it starts to affect their daily functioning. So to have 37% of Canadian youth saying that their feelings about climate change affect their ability to function in their daily life is really meaningful. So we need to really hear that and take that in and understand that. And many studies have now shown that young people really need more support. They're asking explicitly for more support from older generations. Young people report feeling alone with their worries, unsure who to talk to. And they say that when they try to talk to adults about their feelings about climate change, that adults often dismiss them, saying, oh, don't worry, just enjoy your youth, or, oh, it's going to be fine. You know, technology will save us. Or on the other hand, and this is even probably more common, that the burden to solve the issue is put back on them. Like, well, what are you going to do about it? It's up to your generation to save us. Or I have hope in the younger generation to, come up with the solutions that we need. And that's a lot of pressure for young people. So, to summarize the problem, climate change is negatively affecting our mental health. People are worried and overwhelmed. Young people are even more worried and overwhelmed. And people aren't talking about it much, so people are generally suffering alone, leading to disconnect and isolation. But also, the arrow goes the other way too, right? In this direction. Because when we feel overwhelmed and hopeless and alone, it's hard to take action on the issue. Instead, we often shut down and try to avoid thinking about it at all. So our emotions, our emotional overwhelm, can be a real barrier to action. So we care about climate emotions because we care about mental health and well-being in and of itself. And also because we know emotions can drive behavior or inhibit behavior. So emotions like hope can cause us to kind of get up and take action, and emotions like overwhelm and hopelessness can cause us to shut down and give up on climate change. I always think about this kind of direction of how our emotions impact our ability to take action. Or when I talk about that, I always think about a member of my family, a very close member of my family, who comes from an environmental, she's my cousin, and her family they're all environmental activists. She was raised with, her dad is a great environmental activist, attended the first Earth Day, and, was very gung-ho. And she always planned growing up to be an environmental scientist and to, her goal was really to get her degree and to use what she learned to enact real solutions on climate change and help solve this issue or mitigate climate change. But during her education in college, she became so overwhelmed and traumatized by what she was learning in her environmental science program that she really just gave up on that plan. And she doesn't work in that field at all now. She became a pastry chef, which I'm not going to complain about that part of it because I love, she makes great pastries. But we really could have used her in the environmental science field, right? We really need everyone that's interested to be able to get in on the action and help find solutions. And so it's just an example of how kind of overwhelm and how our emotions can really become barriers to action when they become too extreme. And so we really have to pay attention to emotions in the fight, in the climate fight, in order to first to keep people mentally healthy and also to allow them to engage with the issue and take action. So we have to have emotions as a key part of that equation. And just to illustrate that relationship a little bit further, this is a kind of bell-shaped curve illustrating the relationship between climate emotions and climate action. So you might think of this as like climate anxiety. So here, if you're low on climate anxiety, you don't care about, maybe you're not aware of climate change as a problem, or you don't believe it, or you just are kind of, not tipped off to how serious it is, then you're not going to be motivated to take action, right? We have to be somewhat concerned. We have to have an appropriate amount of concern in order to take action. So people low on climate anxiety are not going to take action. On the other hand, if we're overwhelmed by our emotion, if we have too much anxiety, that often also leads to inaction. Often people, just as a coping mechanism, just a way to protect themselves, often kind of just have to shut down and turn away from it. And so the goal with this work of managing our climate emotions is not to kind of stop thinking that climate change is bad or to feel good about climate change. It's really just to kind of manage our emotions in a way that they're at a manageable level, so we're not overwhelmed and we can engage with the issue. So we're in this kind of Goldilocks spot or sweet spot where we're concerned but not overwhelmed by our concern. We're concerned enough that we can engage with the problem and find solutions. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that our emotions about climate change are important. So what should we be doing to navigate our emotions in a healthy way, build resilience for the challenges that are here and are going to continue to ramp up, and to gain the kind of fortitude to engage in sustained action? And I just want to say that the strategies that I'm going to share are useful for supporting yourself. And if you're an educator here, which I think some of you are from that first question that I asked, these are also useful tools that we can think about when we're supporting our students and how to not overwhelm them, but to keep them in kind of that sweet spot. When we're talking to our children about climate change or supporting them in their action. We're talking to family members and neighbors and people in our community. So these are strategies both for ourselves and for supporting others. And I also want to say that what I mean when I talk about resilience, the topic of this conversation is emotional resilience in a changing climate. And what do I mean by resilience? Well, like I said, resilience is not about putting on a happy face or pretending everything's okay. It's not about getting rid of our difficult emotions about climate change, because those feelings are real and justified, and they can be productive. They can motivate us to act. Instead, what I mean by resilience, and part of this is from a definition put forth by a great psychologist in this field, Leslie Davenport, is that resilience in the context of climate change is about cultivating the ability to stay present, open, and empathetic, even as the world around us becomes more stressful and uncertain. Oops. And it's about expanding our capacity to be with more change, more complexity, more loss, and still stay kind of grounded and connected. And for decades, psychologists have studied people who faced enormous challenges, from life-threatening illnesses to war, displacement, and natural disasters. And these researchers wanted to understand what helps some people adjust and recover better than others. And what they found is really powerful, that resilient people don't avoid negative emotions. They feel those negative emotions, but they also maintain the ability to experience positive emotions alongside the hard ones. So resilience isn't the absence of fear or anger or sadness about climate change. It's about the capacity to still feel joy and wonder and connection and hope, even in the midst of all this difficulty. So those positive emotions are really key. And I'm going to talk about that more as we go on. The good news is that as humans, we are built for resilience. So throughout history, we've adapted and found meaning through immense challenges. There's a famous resilience researcher, Anne Masden, who spent her career studying children and people who faced severe adversity, those growing up in poverty, exposed to violence, displaced by war, children of parents struggling with mental illness or addiction, and including those affected by disasters like Hurricane Katrina. And her research showed that many of these children and adults as well were able to recover and even thrive when they had the right skills, support, and connections. So this research, this body of research, which is really huge and really wide-reaching, it tells us something deeply hopeful, that resilience isn't rare. It's actually very common. And it's not a fixed trait that you're just born with. It's something that you can cultivate and strengthen. So Anne Masden called it ordinary magic, meaning that it is magical. It's amazing that these people, in so many different circumstances, that people have demonstrated incredible resilience, but it's also quite ordinary because it's very common. And when we look at research related to climate disasters specifically, we see that although disasters do lead to increases in trauma and depression and anxiety, as I talked about at the beginning. That many people also still demonstrate incredible resilience and are able to adjust after a disaster. So this is a study about the Fort McMurray wildfire in Canada in 2016. And this is one example of this point. And that study showed that 12.8% of residents who had experienced the fire, been directly impacted by the fire, demonstrated clinically significant symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, 6 months after the fire. So this is really meaningful. And I often cite this study to show that climate change has significant impacts on mental health and well-being. But the flip side of this, which is also pretty remarkable, is that 87% of people who were exposed to this major wildfire did not demonstrate significant symptoms of trauma just 6 months after this major wildfire devastated their community. So they had largely adjusted 6 months later. So this is not to diminish the mental health impacts of climate change. My work for a long time really just focused on the increases in post-traumatic stress and depression and anxiety that you see after fires like this, because those are very real and significant. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that many, many people are okay and are able to adjust and get through it without a lot of kind of major mental health disruption. And so that is kind of a hopeful message and a hopeful finding. And beyond the absence of psychopathology, so beyond just saying that like, oh, 87% didn't develop post-traumatic stress, many people also report positive changes or post-traumatic growth after experiencing a disaster. So these are quotes from survivors of the Fort McMurray wildfire. I'm a stronger person than I ever was before. I'm more grateful for every moment with my family. And this last quote is from Jennifer Gray Thompson, who, if you don't know her, she is kind of called the mega fire lady because she experienced the Sonoma fires in 2017 personally, and then went on to become a major advocate and kind of expert on mega fire response and how helping communities deal with mega fires and has been here in LA helping people deal with the mega fires here. And she says, it was a horrible experience going through the Sonoma fires, but the human side of it moved me. I'm so much better and stronger after. I became fearless for fire survivors and communities. I will speak truth to power to anybody who mistreats or leverages them. It changed me. I'm not meek anymore. I'm fierce in how I lead and how I connect, and I would never apologize for that. Okay, so humans have this remarkable capacity for resilience and growth, and that's good because we're going to need a lot of it to face the challenges that are coming our way. And resilience is like a muscle. So how do we strengthen that muscle so we're better equipped to face what's happening and what's to come in the future? Well, this is kind of similar to that other graph that I showed you, but it's a little bit of a different look at it. This is looking at how our nervous system responds to threats like those posed by climate change. So when we experience a threat like climate change, like witnessing negative environmental changes in our environment, or when we're directly impacted by a climate disaster, or doom scrolling, or whatever it is, we can enter kind of fight or flight mode, feeling anxious and overwhelmed and angry and chaotic up here. So this kind of amped up mode. And in this state, we're often incapable of engaging with the threat or problem solving in any kind of productive way. Alternatively, sometimes we can respond by simply shutting down. I talked about this before, by turning away from the problem, ignoring it, and avoiding the topic altogether. And where we really want to be instead is what we call the resilient zone, a place where we can feel grounded and open and curious and present and connected with others, where we can take in information about climate change, learn from it, and engage our problem-solving skills to come up with creative solutions. But why do we so often end up outside of this resilient zone? in this overwhelmed or burned out kind of bands? How do we so often get kicked out of this zone of resilience? Well, one reason for this is something called negativity bias. It's our natural innate tendency to focus more on negative information than positive. As the psychologist Rick Hansen puts it, the mind is like a Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. So we just kind of suck up all the bad stuff very easily. But it's harder for us. Often the good stuff kind of bounces off us. And this is part of our evolutionary wiring. So for our ancestors, remembering threats in our environment, like, oh, those, berries over there made me sick last time I ate them. Those might be poisonous. Or, oh, over there is where the coyote den is. Remembering threats in the environment was essential for survival. So our brains became finely tuned to notice and retain negative experiences and information. So you may be able to relate to this if you've ever had a performance review. You likely remember that one piece of criticism that your supervisor gave you much more clearly than all of the positive feedback and positive things they may have said to you. And in the context of climate change, this bias can be especially strong. So we're constantly exposed to alarming headlines and distressing images, and our brains quickly and easily latch on to that. And the media knows this. The media feeds on that, right? They know that we're more likely to click on bad news stories. And so that's part of kind of the cycle of how the media works. And so because of that, because we are exposed to these alarming headlines so often, our brains latch onto them more. And the scale of, good to bad, like we can easily kind of spiral into doomsday despair because of that. So that's why it's really important to be aware of our negativity bias, to notice when we're spiraling into doomsday thinking, and consciously work to rebalance our perspective. So I'm going to pause for a second and go back to that Minty. Oh darn, I think I closed it. Let me reopen it. And I want to ask you how you can think about it while I'm getting it up. How does negativity bias show up in your life? Is there some way that you've experienced this in your life? Sorry, one second. So I play competitive tennis, and I noticed that, for example, just as one kind of frivolous example, I noticed that I always remember that one bad shot way better than I remember all the good shots that I had in a match. So let's see. Let me go here. Okay. How does negativity bias show up in your life? Guilt. Maybe you notice that your political perspective. I'm hard on myself when I make mistakes, no matter how small. Yep. I hear more bad news than good news for sure. Yeah. You might start noticing this more now. If you didn't know about negativity bias, now that you know about it, you might start really noticing how this plays a part in your life. Focusing on the bad parts of my interactions than the good, yes. So much. For example, reading newspaper headlines can get me stuck in a rumination spiral. I think we can all relate to that. Body image, yes, absolutely. Focusing on that one thing that maybe you don't love about yourself versus all the things as you get older like me, you might look back at pictures of yourself and be like, what was I ever worried about? I was so young and lovely back then. Focusing on what I can fix and do better with. Yeah. Health, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome, aka the colonial capitalist system trying to guilt me and stop me from achieving greatness. Yes, well, I'm glad you're aware of how the system plays a role in that. Self-deprecation mentally, maybe when planned things don't work out, either within or beyond my control. Yeah. It's all right for others to make mistakes and learn, except for me. Yeah. So we're harder on ourselves than we are on other people. Okay, great. Well, keep thinking about that. As I said, I'm kind of constantly surprised by, I'm constantly getting kind of surprised by new examples about how negativity bias is playing a role in my personal life. So you might start to notice it more and more. And it's great to be aware of it. Okay. So what can we do about negativity bias? Well, we just actively have to balance the bad with the good. And there's been careful research experiments that have shown that we focus on negative information 3 to 5 times more than positive information. So that means that we need to consciously give 3 to 5 times more attention to the good just to even things out. So how do we do that? By seeking out positive climate stories, by noticing what's going well, by really kind of leaning into and savoring the good things in your life, and allowing them to kind of really enter your brain. And what was that great quote Rick Hansen said, to weave the positive into the fabric of our brains, allowing the positive stuff to really kind of sink in by leaning into it and savoring it. Reflecting on what we're grateful for and what brings us peace and joy, even in the midst of challenges. And I just want to talk a little bit more about positive emotions because they are really just so powerful. And they're so powerful because they actually help us regulate our stress response and protect our mental health and kind of undo the effects of negative emotions. So whereas negative emotions like worry and anger and anxiety and frustration activate the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, it's like the gas pedal in our bodies that get us revved up and get us, stressed out, increases our heart rate, releases stress hormones, releases even inflammatory cytokines, inflammation in our body. Positive emotions do the opposite. So things like gratitude and joy and wonder and connection, they activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is like the brake in our body, that brake pedal that kind of slows us down. It's the rest and digest system. It calms the stress response. It lowers the heart rate. It calms down the release of stress hormones. It reins in the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, so inflammation. So it really has those positive emotions have a calming effect on our bodies and our brains and our immune systems. So they really can protect the brain and the body from the effects of toxic stress. So they are important not just in kind of a surface way of like, oh, let's try to feel happy, but really in a deeply embodied way. Positive emotions are extremely powerful. And I'll just add that if you've ever been kind of really upset and crying, and a friend or your partner's been comforting you, and they manage to kind of make you laugh in that moment, that you know what that feels like, right? You know what that kind of wash of kind of relief that you feel with that kind of laughter, right? You're really upset and crying and you laugh and you feel the release of those stress hormones. You feel your whole body and brain start to kind of calm down and release like a kind of tea kettle giving off steam, just releasing all of that tension. So that's really the power of positive emotions. Okay, so now that I've given a lot of background on the neurobiology of resilience, I want to offer a really practical tool that can help us strengthen our capacity for resilience, face the challenges coming our way, and give us strength and perseverance to fight for climate solutions. And this is a process that's based on the work of psychologist Rick Hansen, who I mentioned before. And he talks about this as really being a distillation of kind of distillation of so many different kinds of spiritual and reflective practices and clinical psychology approaches to dealing with emotions that really they can all of that can be distilled into these kind of 3 simple steps. And I'm going to unpack them a little bit, but and then we're going to try it together on Menti. But the process very simply is let be, let flow, let in. In other words, let be, observe what's there, let go or let flow, let go of any harmful or damaging or toxic feelings. And let in is about letting in positive feelings. So let me get into that a little bit more. So the first step, as I said, is let be, to be mindful when you're starting to feel anxious or uneasy or stressed or upset, to just be with that experience, to just observe your feelings without judgment. So you can start by asking yourself, oh, what am I feeling? And just noticing your feelings without judgment, with an attitude of openness and curiosity. And then importantly, naming your feelings. Research shows that labeling your emotions can calm the areas of the brain associated with that negative emotion. Like, for example, in the example of anxiety, just saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now can calm the amygdala, which is kind of the brain region associated with anxiety. So it can really help us kind of calm our emotions. And Dan Siegel has a nice term for this. He calls it name it to tame it. So just naming your emotions in and of itself has kind of a calming effect. And also notice what this feeling feels like in your body. A lot of times, feeling is just a constellation of somatic sensations, right? It's the tension in your jaw and the fluttering in your stomach and kind of the tightness in your shoulders. And just noticing that. So just noticing that feeling, naming it, and noticing what it feels like in your body. That's the first step. Let be. And the second step is let flow. So dealing with those painful emotions. So after observing what you're feeling and naming it, we can ask ourselves, what can I do to let these difficult feelings flow? And I want to be clear that letting go, again, of anxiety or worry about the planet doesn't mean that we're giving up on the problem or forgetting about climate change. It just means that we're letting go of potentially taxing or damaging emotions before they can take a toll on your mind and body. So originally, Rick Hansen's conception of this was let go, and we changed it to let flow because of that, because we really don't want to let go of our worry about climate change, but we don't want it also to kind of stay stagnant in our bodies forever and in our brains and cause kind of toxic stress. So we really need to kind of let it flow, knowing that it probably will be back again the next time the new IPCC report comes out, or the next time you read an article or hear about the wildfires in wherever they are next. It'll probably be back, but we can let them flow for now. So there's a lot of things you can do to let these feelings flow. And it kind of just depends on what works for you. A lot of kind of self-care practices can do this: breathing, meditating, exercising, going for a walk, calling a friend. And actually, I really think that the best way to let those feelings, negative feelings, flow is the next step, which is let in, which is all about letting in the positive, opening the door to positive emotions. Like I said before, positive emotions calm the nervous system and can undo the toxic effects of negative emotions. And the ability to experience positive emotions is a key to resilience. So there's some simple ways that we can kind of start to bring in positive emotions. And the first is by gratitude. So you can start by thinking about what you feel grateful or glad about. What are you grateful for? What's good right now? That's one that I use a lot for myself. When I start to feel really negative or worried, I really like the question, what's good right now? Because not only is it bringing in positive emotions, it's also bringing in presence, right? And I can stop and just think about, wow, I have clean air to breathe right now. There's a beautiful oak tree outside my window. There's a warm dog on my lap. There's not literally right now, but often there is. My daughter is healthy. You know, thinking about what we're grateful for and what's good right now can help us really still enjoy our lives, even in the midst of all the chaos going around us. Um, Another kind of way of accessing those positive emotions is to think about post-traumatic growth or meaning. Um, so this is all about finding meaning and identifying ways that you've grown personally as the result of climate change or from dealing with climate grief. So you can ask yourself if the climate crisis has spurred any positive changes in yourself or in the world. And the last one is about connection, action, and hope. So another way to let in the positive is to connect with others, to take action together. So research suggests that taking action with others is more effective on climate change. It's more, can make a bigger impact. And it's also more protective for mental health than taking action alone. So encouraging you to find someone or a group to take action with and take collective action. And taking action can also give rise to hope, realistic hope, because it's grounded in action. Okay, so let's try this together. Here is the Menti. One more time, and I'm going to advance to the next question. Here we go. Okay. I don't know why it's not presenting. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to that first step of let be. So when you think about climate change, how do you feel? In your brain, in your body? Hopeless. Hopeless. That's a big one. Worried. Useless. Numb. Horrible. Scared. Overwhelmed. More worry. More overwhelm. Anxiety. Afraid. Guilty. Sad. Dread. One step forward and five back. Yes. Powerless. Scared. Driven. Great. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which is let flow. Is there anything you can do to help ease these hard feelings? And you might just think about what kind of makes you feel good. Like when you're feeling really bad, what can you do to make yourself feel better? To care for yourself. Go for a mindful walk, be in the moment. Engaging with community. Yes, again, so important to connect with others. That was another, in the resilience literature, another key component is connections with others. Walking in nature and connecting with everything alive. Eating good food, yes. To be honest, just attending today's session and knowing I'm not alone in these climate feelings has really helped. I'm so glad. Yes. And that's very common. I think like I said, we often feel very alone when we're not. Planting seeds, reviewing the work coming out of our project and seeing the impact. That's excellent. Hugging a tree. Yes. There's real healing in that. Walk, call a friend, pray, favorite food, talk to someone, do a small action, take pictures of nature to feel at ease. Grounding, finding something for each of my senses in my immediate vicinity and describing them. Yes, that's a great strategy. Absolutely. Brings in some presence. Spending time with friends, actively searching out the little things. Yeah. Write it out and read it aloud. Yeah. Writing poetry. Beautiful. Participating in my community, making a difference on the ground. Amazing. Okay. So next, let in, the last step, let in, all about letting in the positive. So what's good right now? What are you grateful for? What gives you hope? Action towards climate initiatives. Me too. The student and postdocs working on the issue. Fall is a time of reset, and it feels like it gives us time to act. The sun is shining and the air is clear. That's so nice. Yeah, we have to be grateful for what we still have right now. Increasing climate awareness and seeing more of society upset with the status quo and starting to become involved and taking action. Knowing most people care about climate change. Small wins. Working with young people, that also gives me a lot of hope. Integrating climate education into curriculums globally, excellent. Good health, practices in action, faith, gathering community around the land. I attended the session even though I was scared and stressed, which shows I care about climate justice and my mental health. I love that, and very true. Personhood for nature. The research and good news stories, being able to spend time outside and being able to educate myself on the issue. In spite of all this, I'm still becoming who I need to be and playing a part in healing this world. Finished a presentation. I'm grateful for having a comfy room to rest, and what gives me hope is knowing I get to always learn more and apply it. That's great. Oh, that's sweet. Larissa Dooley, thank you. It gives me hope that Canada is still acknowledging climate change. Yes. I'm grateful for myself because I try to make little steps to educate myself, knowing that all is not lost. But generally, just the beauty of nature around gives me joy and hope. Knowing Indigenous cultures care so much for the land and work so hard to protect it. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I feel more hopeful. And share my screen again. And I'm going to take some questions. I think we have some time for questions, but I just want to share quickly first. We have some great resources on our website at climatementalhealth.net. There are some beautiful grief resources that were created by one of my colleagues, Anya Kamenitz, and Rachel Moskowitz, who's a poet. And they are quite beautiful and profound, and I suggest looking at them. And all of these resources are freely available, free to use. We also have some parent resources for those of you who are parents. A guide for parents and other caring adults to talk about how to talk about climate change with your kids and how to support young people and their emotions about climate change. And I think both of these, I don't know about the climate grief, but this one's also in Spanish as well, available. We also have intergenerational resources. So a guide for kind of having conversations between older and younger generations to kind of help bridge a lot of kind of and address some of the anger and hostility that kind of has come out of the literature around between older and younger generations around climate change. So a guide to kind of having healthy, connecting conversations around climate emotions with people from different generations. And this is a resource I was deeply involved in, which are resources for educators. It's really geared towards middle school educators to help teach, to hold space for the emotional weight of climate change and to kind of help students process their emotions around climate change. Okay, I have time for some questions, and then I'm going to ask you to fill out a quick poll, and then we'll be done. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and I can look in the Q&A. Oh,
Thank you, Larissa. I don't see any questions just yet, but just so everyone knows, we will share the recording and PowerPoint with the resources after today's session.
yeah. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and also put, oh wait, I guess I can't put it in the chat. Or do you
I
mind
can,
opening the chat?
yeah, I can totally
Yeah.
open the chat. Give me a second.
I was going to put the kind of poll, just some feedback poll for this session into the chat, but I don't think I can still send it out. Can you? Maybe you can. Here, I'll put it in the chat and maybe you can send it along down.
Oh yeah, it is a settings thing. I can do it.
Okay, so yeah, so Alana Dunn put the feedback link into the poll into the chat, so please check that out. And we have a question from Angie. What is the biggest societal barrier to integrating climate mental health into social norms? And I think that, you know, as I said, right now it's really not a norm to talk about climate change and our worries about climate change, or to take action on climate change. I personally, in my personal life, outside of my work life, very rarely do people bring up climate change to me in my personal life. And I'm a parent. I volunteer at my daughter's school. There's lots of opportunities and communities that I'm involved in. And the research shows that it's just really, like I said, very infrequently talked about. And so I think really it just is a matter of kind of getting that started. Someone has to start talking about it more. And the more we talk about it, the more it will become a social norm. And we have to people have to hear about it from diverse voices and diverse groups. And we know, from the social norms literature that so when people don't know what to do, they look to what other people are doing to find out what to do, to guide their behavior. And so social norms are incredibly powerful. And I think they are perhaps the biggest key to getting climate action to happen at a bigger level, is just by making it a norm. And so I think the first thing to do is that we need to do collectively is to talk about it more and to invite people to take action with you. So I almost did in this talk, but in some other talks, I often talk about social norms and how people really listen to people in their in-group. So like I said, people, if they don't know what to do, they look to what other people are doing. And more specifically, they look to at what people in their in-group are doing. In their in-group meaning people that are similar to them in some way. So if you are Asian American, For example, you may look to other Asian Americans, and the more specific to your in-group, the more powerful that social norm is. So, for example, I'm mother at Westridge School. You know, my daughter applies or goes to a school called Westridge. And so I am going to be looking at what other mothers at Westridge do, um, who are of the similar kind of leaning, you know, political leaning to me and similar in other ways. So really, we kind of have to get that social norm happening, not just in kind of our in one specific niche of society, but we have to get it into multiple niches of society, right? So we have to kind of have this happening in a lot of different groups across society. And once we get people talking about their concerns about climate change, um, you know, more widely and inviting other people to take action with them, I think that's going to be a major way to, or that could be a major way to get more people on board with making it a social norm and getting more people to act. Okay, how can we balance individual psychology and needs to address emotions, as well as the fact that climate change is a population level, especially as it comes to making change and in research? Um, I don't know. I'm not sure I understand that question. Alana, Don, do you have any thoughts on that? So let me think. Um,
Just realized I muted.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's like that. Like it is the individual work, um, but it's also like a collective issue. So
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that we have to start with our individual psychology and knowing that once we are kind of facing the issues of um, facing these challenges and making ourselves mentally healthy, that's going to naturally kind of spill out at or kind of make a change at a population level. So I think we really have to start with our own mental health first. And we know that starting with our own mental health is really incredibly important before you can be helpful at supporting anyone else, right? So we have to start with our own mental health, and then try to support others in our community, in our spheres of influence. And I think that's the only way we can really make large scale changes by starting with ourselves.
yeah, and if I could
Yeah.
just add, like your individual mental health might even start with connecting with community, not necessarily like
Mhm.
your own work, like or
Yeah,
it's your own work, but you can start by connecting with community and having that safe space to talk about how you feel about it. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, what was the name of the other person who worked on the phrase "let be, let flow, let in"? So that is based on the work of Rick Hansen, and we've adapted it to "let flow," as I said, with his permission. And he is an incredible psychologist who I highly recommend. He's my favorite psychologist, and I know a lot of psychologists. So I strongly recommend checking out. He has a lot of books. He has weekly mindfulness meditations every Wednesday, and a lot of them are focused on things that are he's not really a climate change psychologist or a climate psychologist or focused on this issue specifically at all, but um, a lot of the kind of principles, he works a lot on kind of dealing with trauma and anxiety, and also just living our lives and how to face, you know, in difficult times, and how to kind of face uncertainty and face difficulty with strength. So I highly recommend checking him out. Rick Hansen. Play Daybreak with your family. Gives us lots to talk about. Yes, I've heard about that game, and I have to remember, I'll have to refresh my memory about the specifics of that, because I've heard good things. So thank you. I will definitely take that suggestion and pass it on. Um, let's see. Oh, sorry. for post-secondary students specifically, what might be some examples of resilience building while they learn about the environment and climate changing time? How might they differ as a population compared to other members of society? Um, well, is post-secondary is that college in Canada? And yeah, college, okay, university, yeah. So I think we have to remember that the brain really is still developing through the mid-20s. So, you know, some people, it's pretty commonly called adolescence still in your early 20s when you're in university. So I think that we have to really be mindful that there is still a lot of kind of vulnerability at the university age. And we have to be mindful about, like I shared that story about my cousin who was so overwhelmed and kind of turned away from the field altogether, that we really have to be mindful about how we talk about climate change with young people in particular, and really with all people. That I think we want to convey. We have to be careful in the way that we communicate about climate change, because we do want to reflect the urgency of the problem, because it is a very urgent problem. But when we start to get into kind of crisis framing or disaster framing or catastrophe or end of the world framing, then we start to really kind of turn people off and get people into an overwhelmed state where they really can't cope with that kind of thinking. And it's really just counterproductive. So I think that the first thing is thinking about how information about climate change is delivered, and thinking about that negativity bias, that ratio of 1 to 3 of like, when we're delivering hard news about climate change, really balancing it out with some positive news stories about climate solutions, about connection, about even just taking breaks to kind of feel good and reset our nervous systems. And so I think that's really important. And I also think that kind of giving a chance for university students and younger students too to just voice their emotions, like taking time out of climate education to allow people to talk about their feelings like we have in this session today, can be really helpful. And, like I said, name it to tame it, just talking about your emotions in and of itself is a really, is a step of resilience building, and helping people feel less alone and less isolated in their feelings. So I think that really kind of thinking about how we communicate that information, holding space for emotions, validating their emotions, understanding that they're not alone, and then trying to take action with younger people, I think is really important. As I don't know if Fatima, if you're an older person, I'm not sure what your age is, but for me, with my daughter and some of her schoolmates, she formed an environmental group. I think it's been really powerful for them to kind of just know that adults are on their side, because I helped organize, along with some other parents, some climate action and cleanups and things like that. And I think it's really helpful for the kids to know that they're not alone in not just their worry about climate change, but in the action piece of it too. Like, we're here side by side with them, taking action with them. And that's true for university students as well. They don't want to feel like the burden is all on them. They want to feel like older generations are stepping up too, and doing their part. Do you have any recommendations for finding positive climate related news to help balance the negative news? Yes, I do, and I'm blanking on the name. If anyone else knows any, feel free to put it in the chat, but there's a news source. I know that Project Drawdown has some great they're all about the solutions, which is great. And I know I just can't think of the name of it right now, but I'll send it after. If anyone else knows any, feel free to
You
pipe up.
know, I think there's a website called like Positive Climate News. I'm just
Yeah,
trying
it's
to
something
remember.
like that. And I just can't think of the precise name, and my internet's going slow.
Um, yeah, there's the Daily Climate Good News. If you are with you Calgary, if you check out the Mobilizing Alberta site, you could see the 20 projects that are really local here, that are
Yeah.
taking positive action. And then just like learning about, I think, all the different like eco and social justice groups in your community, and all the great work that they're doing is really inspiring. Indigenous Climate Action here in Alberta is another good one, doing amazing work. Great question though. I think doom scrolling is something that a lot of us get sucked into, so good
Yeah.
question.
Great. Oh, okay. Yes, sorry. This is what I was thinking of. The League of Conservation Voters has a good climate news roundup that I have subscribed to. And I like, so that's a good one as well.
Can you repeat that one again, Larissa? The League.
It's the League of Climate Voters, or no? League of Conservation Voters. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it in the show.
Yeah. Oh, I also recommend Anya Comenitz's, who works for the Climate Mental Health Network. She has a great newsletter, and her last one was all focused on the positive. So I would check her out. Okay, well, um, I think that's all I have. Lana, Dawn, I know you had some closing slides.
Yeah, just a huge thank you, Larissa, for this amazing presentation. And thank you all for your amazing questions as well. I do have some local resources around climate grief, that we can share with you. I'll just highlight, and we'll also share the PowerPoints from today's session. So these are general wellness services if you were here at UCalgary campus. So if you were to Google UCalgary Student Wellness Services, you'll learn more about the counseling, student support advising. Please contact the Distress Center if you're experiencing any urgent care or crisis support needs. It's 24/7, so it's 403-266-4357. If you're staff or faculty, there's the TELUS Health, which is available to you. Again, if you Google UCalgary Faculty and Staff Wellness Services, you'll find all these details here. But just quickly, I'll highlight number one, Climate Mental Health Network. Please check out their website. They have many wonderful resources and lots of webinars that they host. I also recommend the Climate Therapy Support column. It's led by Britt Ray, but there's, I think, 4 diverse climate psychologists that answer really common questions for how people feel on this topic. And I also really benefit from that. If you're looking for kind of that one-to-one support with a climate aware therapist, there is a link here that you can check out. Many of them are not based in Canada though, just so you know, so it'll most likely be online, but you can still check that out. For more kind of collective community building supports, I recommend the Good Grief Network. You can also check out refugee retreats. Unthinkable Earth Resources is really great. It's developed by Britt Ray and crew, and it actually will take you through a quiz and customize, based on how you're feeling and what your needs are, and just give you like a whole host of resources. Here is more websites and books and podcasts that I won't go over, but I will definitely share it with everyone. So thank you all to those who are still here with us and spending your lunchtime with us. And huge thank you again to Larissa and all the work you and your team do at the Climate Mental Health Network.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Enjoy it, everyone.